doctors who prescribe opioids for payouts while being aware of its consequences for patients should be prosecuted with the full force of the law. I think this is very true and real. I think that doctors should be prosecuted if they do such a thing. Because you're putting your patients and the world's life in danger. You never know who they could be selling it to. You never know who get their hands on those opioids. And yeah.
Big Pharma needs to be regulated more tightly, people over profit. I agree. I think Big Pharma focuses a lot on money instead of people, just like the person is saying, and I think that has to be regulated just for the people's health and to make sure we're prioritizing that over like the economy or anything, because at the end of the day, health matters more than money.
Opioids should be decriminalized. I don't know if I entirely agree with that. I think opioids are like highly addictive, and I do think that we do need to have less harsh punishment for opioid possession, but like I don't know if we need to entirely decriminalize opioid.
So the opioid epidemic has caused much pain and suffering for the public. The government has some of the blame. I think it could take part of the blame just because it has a role in policy making and whatnot, and the fact that this still is an issue, I feel like just signifies that there's a lot of room for improvement, and it could take a step in the right direction with like that specific mechanism, policy changes. So yeah, I think they can take part of the blame.
The Sackler family has not been adequately punished. I don't really know a whole lot on the subject of the Sackler family and their connection to the opioid epidemic, but my opinion is generally that our focus needs to be more on helping those affected by the harms of the opioid epidemic as opposed to going after those who may have profited off of it. Now, it is important to hold those accountable, but I think that our efforts should be more focused on helping those in need.
Big Pharma needs to be regulated more tightly, people over profit. I completely agree. I think that there's too much incentive to overprescribe people's really powerful medications in the name of profit, in the name of money. So I think that we should, or physicians and doctors more broadly, should be more considerate in what they're prescribing and thinking about when they're giving patients medicine.
Countries like Canada, China, US, and Mexico should be held more accountable for illegal drugs. I think that federal regulatory institutions should be held accountable rather than putting blame on foreign countries.
Governments aren't doing enough to stop the mass transportation of illegal drugs. I do agree with that. I think that was a good statement. I agree with that. They definitely need to be doing more to stop that. I'm not sure, what that may be, but I do think that was a good statement.
Actual problem that was created by a systemic issue by the CIA back in the 70s, 80s. The problem is that the culture of a lot of low-income communities was affected by that systemic issue that they started, and they haven't been able to really restructure it yet, creating this endless cycle of opiate usage.
Society as a whole needs to take more responsibility over opioid usage.
I agree. There's a lot of other stuff that society needs to take responsibility over.
Addiction is the main factor plaguing the opioid epidemic. So I disagree that education is the main factor plaguing opioid epidemic, and that people need to be educated, and we need to put money into stopping the addiction from happening rather than the addiction itself.
Foreign countries should be held most accountable for opioid epidemic. Tend to disagree with this opinion, as I think that the home country should be held most accountable for anything that happens domestically inside that country, and in this case is the opioid epidemic. It's sure that maybe other countries might be playing a part in supplying this opioid or these substances, but at the end of the day it's the policies, it's the domestic policies that govern and rule how much they can take and how to regulate the use of these substances. So I guess my conclusion is I disagree with this opinion. I think the home country should be held most accountable for any domestic events.
Doctors are obliged to tell patients about the effects of the drugs they are prescribing/giving. Extremely reasonable. Doctors 100% should tell their patients the effects, positive and negatives, of whatever drugs they give them. We live in a pill-heavy industry, and so that's probably not happening most of the case. Probably giving pills out, prescribing pills. This is about opium. In cases where they're not necessarily necessary. And so, yeah, I agree with the statement 100%.
So doctors are obligated to tell patients about the effects of the drugs that they are prescribed or given. I agree with this because I think everybody should know what they're putting in their bodies. Technically, like, even if you believe that something is good, it might have like so many side effects that I think everybody should be aware of. And like, at the same time, I think like it's not only the role of the doctor, but like also of the patient. Like of course the doctor has to like be transparent with her patient, but like I think also the patient, if it's like a new treatment or if it's something that is like, you know, not very well known, maybe like doing like an individual type of research, I think that would be a good path to follow, especially when it's like health matters. But yeah, like science can change like over time, so like there's always new stuff coming out that people didn't know before, and I think it's good to like be on top of that.
Opioids should be decriminalized. Personally, I don't think all of them should be decriminalized. I think the ways in which people get access to them should be modified, and in a sense, yes, we should legalize a lot of them, but if we're talking about practices of whether people are using opioids from other people, that should not be something we decriminalize. We should also look at it in aspects of how it's going to impact children and their parents, but overall, I think legalizing is the right move, but we need to do it in a way that we're not just decriminalizing it and dropping the ball. There has to be institutions built up around it. We have to have informed people. We have to have a police that are compassionate, are ready to react to overdoses anyways. If we are just going to remove, yes, all taboo from it, but if we're not going to provide the support, it doesn't make sense.
Addiction is a main factor plaguing the opioid epidemic. I think this is true because if it wasn't for addiction, I think that the problems that we usually associate with the epidemic wouldn't even be there. So dependency definitely impacts somebody's quality of life so much, them and their loved ones, and can lead in some extreme cases to loss of life. So I think if the addiction was not there, then the opioid epidemic would either not exist or not have as much of an impact that it does on people's lives.
To what extent have social factors influenced how disproportionately affected certain groups are by the opioid crisis here? I think there's economic factors that really have a lot to play with this, especially poverty, because those who are experiencing an addiction and also are in poverty are struggling with said addiction a lot of times, I feel like, worse.
Doctors are obligated to tell patients about the effects of the drugs they're prescribed or given. Of course, bro. Before they prescribe the medications, like at least tell the patients, because even if you need patients to do their own research, sometimes like we don't have that much information on the internet, and we also can't rely on the internet these days. That's another opinion.
The opioid epidemic disproportionately impacted low-income and minority communities. We do see higher rates of drug abuse or substance abuse in these communities, and this also ties to criminalization of Black and brown communities, where police officers are more likely to associate these people because of their skin tone with low morality or just negative moral traits, so they're more likely to be policed for these things. But also higher use of these substances is tied to a lot of issues, including infrastructure in the U.S., social infrastructure, and how these drugs are more easily disseminated in certain neighborhoods, or mental health issues and lack of proper solutions, and just maybe closer exposure to production of different types of substances and things. So also beyond just more policing and people being jailed or in prison for these things, we also see more health issues and mental health issues from substance abuse.